if they're bombed, could spell disaster for people in and around the area. Well, let's get more on those Libyan planes from Carl Stanio Navarro, who's a journalist based in Malta. Carl, first of all, what more do we know about these jets which were seen taking off from Tripoli?
Well, surely the information is rather confusing. The planes have changed flight plans at least 3 times since they left this morning from Mytika Airport in Tripoli. Now, Mytika is a private military airstrip which is normally used by the Gaddafi family. We know they took off at about 9:30 Central European time, and they were bound for 3 different destinations. One was for Vienna in Austria, the other one was for Cairo in Egypt, and the other one was for Athens in Greece. Now, it seems that they changed the flight plans once again, and they've all now veered towards Cairo. One of those planes has landed. We are told, because I have also contacted sources in Cairo, that one airplane is carrying a senior military Libyan official who is expected to have a meeting with the armed forces commander of the Egyptian junta, the name being Hussein Tantawi Soliman, who is a rather very high-ranking army commander in Egypt. The reason for the meeting, however, is unknown. But also, we are hearing that the Libyans are probably sending a delegation to the Arab League in an attempt to try and negotiate some kind of political policy for Libya at this point in time, as the Arab League meets to decide on no-fly zones and possible solutions to the Libyan crisis. Shirley?
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, presumably we know that they're all Gaddafi's private planes because of their very distinct call signs.
Well, they have distinct call signs. Every aircraft has a tail number, and there are 5 belonging to the Gaddafi family. Now, these 3, in particular, one of them, identified as 5A-DCN, is the Gaddafi plane. Now, we know Gaddafi doesn't fly much. He doesn't like that, especially flying over water, and this has been known to many for a long time. However, this plane has been making the rounds around different airports in Europe over these past weeks. Whether it's a game, nobody knows. However, what we can say is that this plane was identified by an AWAC aircraft just last Sunday, and the AWAC aircraft belonging to NATO asked the Maltese control tower for information on this aircraft, which happened to be inbound to Tripoli from Amman in Jordan. Nobody knows who is aboard these planes, who is using these planes, and for what reason they're flying out and in to Libya practically almost every day. So far, they're not impounded, and they're not involved in any UN sanctions or EU sanctions, because so far there is only a flight ban imposed on Gaddafi and his family and some other officials within the Gaddafi regime, and therefore we don't know whether these people are on board unless they are spotted coming off those planes in the airports they land.
OK, Carl, thanks very much indeed for that information. Carl Stanio Navarro speaking to us from Malta there. So we're told the planes are heading for Cairo. Let's talk to Ayman Mohyeddin, who's in the Egyptian capital for us. Ayman, we're hearing that one of the jets has already landed and was carrying a senior Libyan military official who, according to Carl, may be there to speak to one of the Egyptian military leaders. Do you know any more?
Well, surely officials both at the airport and with the Supreme Council for the Armed Forces, which is essentially running the country right now, have been very tight-lipped about any possible plane landing in Cairo. I can tell you from speaking to sources at the airport, it has not landed in the civilian part of the airport. The way the Cairo International Airport is essentially set up is there is a civilian terminal in which all civilian flights land, and very adjacent to it or close by to it is the military part of that airport. So there is a possibility it may have landed within the airport that belongs to the Air Force, but indeed no confirmation from any officials at Cairo International Airport that a plane has indeed landed. Officials at the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces that we've been trying to get in touch with have not confirmed the arrival of any plane, and they're certainly not talking about the possibility of any Libyan officials meeting with any senior officials from that Supreme Council of the Armed Forces yet. So you can imagine right now, as these developments are happening, a little bit of confusion also here on the ground in Egypt.
Yeah, I appreciate that there is a veil of secrecy over what's going on here, but if they were going to Cairo, why Cairo? I mean, could it be because there's an Arab League meeting there at the weekend?
That is certainly one possible scenario. It's important to emphasize, though, that the Arab League has made very clear that no Libyan delegation would be invited or allowed to participate. In fact, so far, there have been several meetings at various levels within the Arab League, from the ambassadorial level all the way up to the foreign ministers level. In neither of these meetings did a delegation from Libya participate. And more importantly, it would be unlikely that a Libyan official would be communicating with the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, which is running Egypt, to talk about a situation involving the Arab League. In this particular situation, the Arab League would certainly want to try to maintain its autonomy, or at least its independence from the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces. It does not mean that the Supreme Council or its leadership cannot engage in bilateral relationships with senior officials from the Libyan government. But if indeed a Libyan plane has landed in Egypt to meet or try to negotiate its participation in the Arab League, it would have to be via the Arab League, not through Egypt's military, which does not have at this particular stage any say over the League of Arab States.
Okay, Ayman, thanks for that. Ayman Mohyeddin in Cairo there. Well, let's go back to what's happening within Libya. The UN Special Investigator on Torture has just announced that he's opened an inquiry into abuses carried out by Muammar Gaddafi's forces. Lawrence Lee reports on the latest developments in Libya.
Whether it's accurate to call what's happening in Libya as civil war is open to debate. What's increasingly beyond doubt is the incoherent way in which both sides are acting. At least the opposition, both politically and militarily, are prepared to accept their weaknesses. Many of these men, however brave they are, have little knowledge about the weapons they're using. And faced with air supremacy from Gaddafi's forces, are increasingly taking casualties. Rebel commanders, some of whom switched sides to back the opposition, are complaining about fighters rushing around, seemingly unable to take orders. Down that road must lie disaster for the rebel movement, however enthusiastic they sound.
Where is Gaddafi? We want him here where we're fighting. Gaddafi is sitting in his control room. We don't know where he is.
Nor can Benghazi's political opposition really be blamed for its internal issues, given that for the last 2 generations there's been no such thing as open debate in Libya. But the problem was certainly highlighted by the confusion over whether or not they'd really offered Gaddafi an exit from the country, first claiming and then denying it.
Our demands are as clear as the revolution. We are not negotiating at all. We have appealed to the United Nations to impose a no-fly zone in Libya to protect our families and to prevent any aircraft attacks like the ones you are hearing about.
It says nothing for Gaddafi that he's unable to take more advantage of these weaknesses. His latest offer to talk to the media in Tripoli turned into a farcical speech behind a curtain in the middle of the night, in which he once again suggested there was no domestic opposition.
It's a small group from Afghanistan, Algeria, Egypt and Palestine who entered cities. They recruited youngsters, juveniles under the age of 20, upon whom the law cannot even apply. How did they recruit them? They told them to chant, "Say Allahu Akbar."
Perhaps he can get away with this kind of thing in Tripoli because